Hey, Coach Thomas, this is Taylor Carswell with Chapter 29, and that is on Wilson and his presidency. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the election of 1912, and this is a bull moose election. So Woodrow Wilson won this election because of the splitting of the Republican Party. So he was against Taft, who had recently been president, was about half the Republican Party, and then Roosevelt, who was president quite a few years ago, said that he wanted a third term, not like a continuous third term, but, like an after third term. So now he'd come back and he'd wanted a third term, just like dating. It's like if you dated a guy and then he broke up with you, then after you were dating another guy, he came back and he was like, either way. So after the Republican Party broke, then they could not decide on a singular candidate. So Woodrow Wilson ended up running for the Democratic candidate, and he won just barely. He was a minority president because of the split of the Republican Party, and he was the first Democratic president to win in a very long time. So Woodrow Wilson, the minority president, he won the Electoral College with 435 votes, and that was not a minority. However, the popular votes, he was only 41%. So now Wilson was an idealist, and triple privilege was the tariff, the banks, and the trust. So to tackle the tariff, Wilson lowered the tariff with the Underwood Tariff of 1913, which replaced the import fees. Next, he moved to the banks, and so he investigated all the banks, and he figured out everything that was wrong. Then he went to Congress, and he was like, okay, guys, this is what we got to fix. So the result was the Federal Reserve Act, which basically appointed a board to oversee a nationwide 12 research districts in the banks. So each district had its own central bank, and each district also had the power to issue paper money, which had never really been done before. This is the Federal Reserve notes. So now the president moved to the trust, and he passed the Federal Trade Commission Act. So Wilson was very progressive, although he was rumored to be a racist. So his foreign policy was moral diplomacy, and in Mexico, this was kind of when it first came into play. So Mexico was very angry with America because it had been exploited for so long. The Mexicans had been exploited for oil, railroads, mines, and the Mexicans were very, very poor. So this caused lots of immigration to America from Mexico. So there was a rise in violent rebels. Huerta, he was kind of the leader of them, and he was very violent against Americans. So basically, the Tampico incident in Mexico in 1914, a small amount of sailors were taken by Mexican forces, and America got very, very mad because Wilson wasn't protecting them. So basically, the ABC powers, which was Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, mediated this situation between Mexico and America to come up with a solution. And Pancho Villa, who was was kind of a bandit, kind of a rebel, he killed like 16 Americans, and President Wilson sent General John J. Pershing after to capture him, and Pershing chased him, but he could not find him, and he never did. Okay, so then we move into World War I. Okay, on to World War I. So America, when after the assassination, we were like, okay, we want to stay neutral. Wilson was very careful to stay neutral. However, the Germans came up with this innovation about the U-boats, and the U-boats, which were basically submarines, started attacking United States ships. Now, the Lusitania is the most famous, but the Sussex was also very important. When the Germans sunk the Sussex, Wilson convinced Germany to make the Sussex Pledge, which basically said that they could not sink any more ships. However, the Germans any more United States merchant ships. The Germans came up with this clause, and it was basically like the United States had to persuade Great Britain to break their blockade, which they deemed inappropriate. And so America was like, we can't do that, but you're still going to take this pledge. So Germany was like, okay, whatever. And it was a victory for America. And it was a big victory for Woodrow Wilson. However, it was very precarious. So during 1916, another election came up. Republicans chose Charles Hughes, who was he was kind of wishy-washy as far as his views, and Wilson was once again the Democratic nominee. So Wilson, his whole thing was, I will keep you out of the war. And America was very cautious to elect another president in such a trying time, such a high tension time in the world. So Wilson barely pulled through and got reelected. He beat Hughes with a vote of 277 to 254 in the Electoral College. And he did promise to keep America out of the war. However, he actually led us into it. So that's chapter 29. Thank you.